The divine name pattern in Genesis, a theological analysis. The book of Genesis, the foundational text of the Hebrew Bible, narrates the origins of the cosmos, humanity, and the covenant people of Israel. For centuries, scholars have analyzed its shifting use of divine names, Elohim, Yahweh, and the compound Yahweh Elohim, often attributing the variations to different authorial sources as proposed by the documentary hypothesis. However, a closer examination, informed by the cultural and theological frameworks of the ancient Near East, reveals a highly sophisticated and intentional literary pattern. As detailed in the provided analytical documents, Genesis employs these names with remarkable precision to distinguish between two fundamental modes of divine action: the universal, administrative, and governmental work of Elohim, and the personal, direct, and covenant-relational work of Yahweh. This pattern is not merely a stylistic choice, but a theological key that unlocks the book's profound understanding of God's sovereignty, His method of cosmic governance through a divine counsel, and His intimate personal engagement with His chosen lineage. This theological architecture is established with breathtaking clarity in the opening chapters. Genesis 1 exclusively uses Elohim 31 times to describe the systematic organization of the cosmos. This is not a narrative of material creation ex nihilo, but an account of a divine government establishing order, assigning functions, and populating jurisdictions. The language is administrative, focusing on separating, assigning, and giving dominion. This governmental context culminates on the seventh day, where Elohim's rest signifies not fatigue, but an enthronement, the inauguration of the cosmic government, a concept deeply rooted in ancient Near Eastern temple-building myths, where a deity takes his seat to begin his active rule. In Genesis 2, the narrative focus shifts dramatically from the cosmic to the personal, and the divine name changes with it. The consistent use of the compound Yahweh Elohim signals the personal king, Yahweh, acting directly within his newly established government, Elohim. He forms Adam with his own hands, plants a garden, and issues a personal covenantal command, establishing an intimate relationship that is distinct from the broader administrative work of creation. This distinction becomes critical in Genesis 3, where the serpent strategically drops the personal name Yahweh, tempting Eve with an appeal to the more ambiguous authority of Elohim. This is a theological manipulation, an act of cosmic subversion that attempts to pit the perceived will of the divine bureaucracy against the specific personal command of the covenant king. When the king confronts this rebellion, he does so again as Yahweh Elohim, reasserting his full, personal, and governmental authority. This foundational pattern continues with remarkable consistency throughout the rest of Genesis, navigating complex narratives of cosmic judgment, national distribution, and patriarchal development. The flood narrative masterfully weaves the two divine names to illustrate different aspects of the same event. The systemic corruption caused by the rebellious sons of Elohim, members of the divine government, is assessed and judged by Elohim in a cosmic administrative decree against all flesh. Yet, within this governmental judgment, the Supreme King acts personally. It is Yahweh who grieves, Yahweh who finds grace in Noah, and Yahweh who personally shuts the ark door, a tender act of covenant protection. Following the flood, the new universal covenant with all of humanity and every living creature is established with Elohim, as it is a broad governmental decree, not a specific lineage-based covenant. Conversely, the judgment at Babel is conducted exclusively by Yahweh, which appears to be a governmental act. However, it is framed as a personal royal intervention. The king himself comes down to see and personally directs his divine counsel, "Let us go down," signifying a crisis that required the supreme monarch's direct attention rather than a routine administrative decree. The lives of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, are portrayed as a progressive journey of integration into this divine governmental structure while maintaining a personal covenant with Yahweh. Abraham's initial calling and promises are exclusively from Yahweh. However, in Genesis 17, a pivotal shift occurs. The encounter begins with Yahweh, but immediately transitions to Elohim for the remainder of the chapter, which details the administrative instructions for name changes and the institution of circumcision. This signals Abraham's elevation from a simple covenant recipient to a participant in the divine government. This dual status is confirmed in the testing of Isaac, Genesis 22, which is initiated as a governmental test from Elohim to affirm Abraham's fitness for his high office. But the rescue comes via the angel of Yahweh, a direct, personal intervention to preserve the covenant. Jacob's journey mirrors this progression. His famous ladder vision reveals the structure of the divine government, the angels of Elohim, but it is Yahweh who stands above it to speak to him personally and renew the covenant. Later, Jacob struggles with Elohim, an event that signifies his own trial and integration into the divine council, which is confirmed when his covenant is renewed at Bethel exclusively by Elohim. The Joseph narrative provides the pattern's most sustained and compelling confirmation, as Joseph navigates both his personal covenant relationship and his role within a foreign government. Throughout his enslavement and imprisonment, the text repeatedly states that Yahweh was with Joseph, emphasizing the personal, covenantal blessing that causes him to prosper. However, the moment Joseph begins to operate in a cross-cultural or governmental capacity, his language shifts exclusively to Elohim. When refusing Potiphar's wife, he appeals to a universal moral standard, a sin against Elohim. When interpreting dreams for Pharaoh's officials and for Pharaoh himself, he consistently credits Elohim, the universal divine authority a non-covenant ruler would understand. Even after revealing his identity to his brothers, Joseph explains God's grand providential plan to save nations using Elohim, framing his personal ordeal as part of a vast act of divine governmental administration that transcends his own family. His brothers, believing they are dealing with the authority of a foreign government, likewise use Elohim. Only in a moment of raw, personal faith does the covenant name break through. As Jacob, blessing his sons in Egypt, cries out, "I have waited for your salvation, O Yahweh." Genesis 49:18. In conclusion, the divine name pattern in Genesis is a profound and consistent theological framework that reveals the biblical author's sophisticated understanding of God's nature and rule. Far from being the result of haphazardly edited sources, the precise alternation between Yahweh and Elohim serves to communicate a coherent worldview. It portrays a universe governed by the administrative authority of Elohim, a divine council, presided over by a supreme king, Yahweh, who also engages in a direct, personal, and covenantal relationship with humanity. From the cosmic administration of creation to the intimate protection of the ark's inhabitants, from the testing of the patriarchs to Joseph's statesmanship in Egypt, this pattern holds with a consistency that points to a deliberate authorial strategy. It establishes a theological grammar that distinguishes the personal from the governmental, the covenantal from the cosmic, and in so doing, lays the foundational worldview for the entire biblical story that follows. The preservation of this pattern in the Septuagint, as Kyrios and Theos, would ultimately provide the essential framework for the New Testament authors to identify Jesus of Nazareth as the personal Kyrios who had come to restore the just government of Theos, the Father.